We have major breaking news on the redistricting fight between Republicans and Democrats nationwide. The Virginia Supreme Court just struck down the new Democrat-friendly redistricting plan that voters just approved at the ballot box a few weeks ago. Let's bring in MS Now's legal affairs reporter, Fallon Gallagher, and this ruling just came out. I know you're still reading in. Fallon, what are you learning?
Yeah, this is there were a few cases pending before the Virginia Supreme Court, and this is the first one that happened to reach it. So the Virginia State Supreme Court has struck down the new congressional map that was approved by voters on the basis that the special legislative session that was called to create this map was a violation of the state's constitution. And I want to read from a key graph in this ruling. It says, on March 6th, 2026, the General Assembly of Virginia submitted to Virginia voters a proposed constitutional amendment that authorizes partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts in the Commonwealth. We hold that the legislative process employed to advance this proposal violated Article 7, Section 1 of the Constitution of Virginia. This constitutional violation incurably taints the resulting referendum vote and nullifies its legal efficacy. Now, of course, they are taking issue here with the way that this legislative session was called. I need to double check, but I believe it was because state legislators called that session and they don't actually have the authority to do so. But this is basically they're overturning the map on the basis of which it was created, not based on any sort of way the lines were drawn, but on the procedural grounds in which this map came to be.
So could the legislature try again? What's next?
This is a final ruling because it is from the state Supreme Court. They might be able to try a different way if they call the legislative session in a different way and try redistricting again. But it appears at this point, as again, we are still reading this decision, that this map will not be in play for 2026.
And that being said, what does that mean for the voters and what maps they're actually using?
If this new map is blocked, theoretically, they will be using the maps that have been on the books before this. So the map that they would have used in 2024 should be the map that will hold now for the midterm elections this year.
And so politically, this is bad news for Democrats, good news for Republicans. Fallon, I'll let you get back to reading in so you can bring us more details as you get them. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York on a Friday. Donald Trump's chaos, incompetence, and governing at a time of war by Truth Social post has come back to bite him in the you-know-what when it comes to the war with Iran. An abrupt decision to launch an operation led to pushback from stalwart allies of the United States in the region and a humiliating public climb down by Donald Trump. Multiple outlets, including NBC News, The Wall Street Journal, and The New York Times, are today able to report that Donald Trump was forced to stop what the administration had dubbed Project Freedom and announced it was a plan to help ships cross the Strait of Hormuz after Saudi Arabia refused to let the U.S. military use its bases and airspace. Here's how NBC News describes it. Quote, Trump surprised Gulf allies by announcing Project Freedom on social media Sunday afternoon, the official said, angering leadership in Saudi Arabia. The call between Trump and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman did not resolve the issue, the two U.S. officials said, forcing the president to pause Project Freedom in order to restore U.S. military access to the critical airspace. Donald Trump angered other allies in the region as well. A Middle Eastern diplomat with knowledge of the matter told our colleague David Rode that Donald Trump failed to tell Oman, the country that sits on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz from Iran. Other outlets report that Kuwait and Qatar were not informed either. The Trump administration insists that allies were notified in advance. Donald Trump claimed on Truth Social that the operation was paused because of progress in negotiations, but there is no known reporting to suggest that that is actually the case. Regardless, the operation was not going particularly well for the United States. Just 2 ships made it through the Strait of Hormuz in 36 hours. Here's how the Wall Street Journal describes the journey of one of those 2 ships. From that reporting, quote, the Alliance Fairfax, a towering black and white car carrier ship that had been stranded in the Persian Gulf for over 2 months, was finally making a break for it. Quote, you were all set to go, U.S. military officer radioed as the ship glided through the Strait of Hormuz on Monday and swung around the peninsula at the northern end of Oman. Safe travels. Soon after, Iran launched a barrage of missiles and drones at commercial ships at the U.S. Navy and at one of America's allies, the United Arab Emirates, where an oil transit hub was set ablaze. U.S. helicopters sank Iranian speedboats. and Iranian drones hit a civilian ship. The intervening hours included the most serious escalation in the conflict since President Trump declared a ceasefire in the war in April. That's where things stand right now. That's where we are. A ceasefire in which both the U.S. military and Iran are attacking each other, but also claiming that the ceasefire remains in effect. U.S. Central Command announced this morning that U.S. forces attacked 2 ships that were violating the blockade on Iranian ports. Donald Trump set back on his heels after backlash from close allies over a hastily arranged plan to break Iran's control over one of the world's most important waterways. Is unfortunately where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, Ben Rhodes, is back. Also joining us, Puck News senior political columnist and national affairs analyst John Heilman's here. And with me at the table, our national security reporter, the aforementioned David Robe. Everyone wants America to win. Everyone wants American military assets and any commercial assets to be safe. No one is rooting against America or, in this capacity, Donald Trump. But there is an unavoidable reality to the fact, I mean, it is really hard to piss off Saudi Arabia, and we have done that.
In 50 years, this hasn't happened. That's what's so extraordinary. And the fact that the president launched this incredibly important operation, and it might have succeeded. It was to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by force. It would have taken Iran's big leverage point away from them. It would have brought down energy prices eventually. And it was very well planned, and it was only America could do it. They complain about other countries, but there was 100 aircraft providing 24/7 sort of air cover for this operation. And it is astounding that the president and his aides did not inform any of our allies in the country. From Saudi Arabia, the stalwart you talked about, to Oman, which actually borders the waterway and should have known. And it's incredible. And then the Wall Street Journal's reporting, great reporting by our former colleagues at NBC, breaking it. And then Kuwait closed its airspace also. It's astonishing, again, how many unforced errors are happening. And then lastly, the president lies about why he ends the operation. He claims it's because there's progress in the negotiations with Iran, when in fact it's because Saudi Arabia and Kuwait closed their airspace to U.S. aircraft.
Donald Trump has, it's like a signature of his rule to alienate our NATO allies, but it's a new feature to alienate our Mideast allies. Just talk about the risks for him having ostracized all of our NATO allies and now put America in a place of, frankly, unprecedented tensions with these allies in the Mideast.
The risk will be clear next week when he goes to China. And he's not going as a weak leader with plenty of allies around him. Instead, he's systematically alienating people with off-the-cuff ideas or insulting them. I mean, if you just go back to Canada being the 51st state, Greenland was, then the focus, and then this, war of choice in Iran, and just belittling the Europeans who have lots of minesweepers, lots of ships that could have been part of this. And even if he wanted to go to war with Iran, he could have done it in the Bush way. George H.W. and George W. getting a coalition together, going to the UN Security Council, saying Iran is violating these things. Ben can say more about this. But instead, it's a go it alone and insult your allies. And then again, to launch this operation without telling, Saudi Arabia and all these countries was just a huge mistake that I think will haunt this country and his presidency.
Ben Rhodes, to be a fly on the wall when MBS, for whom Donald Trump towed the line on Khashoggi better than literally some Saudis did, for MBS to say, I've seen enough, I'm out, is just an extraordinary point to be pushed to when it comes to Donald Trump's conduct.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of things to it. I mean, to kind of return to your opening, Nicole, I think the problem is nobody knows what America is trying to win. It started with regime change, and then, the destruction of the nuclear program. Those things, did not come to fruition. Now winning just seems to be opening a strait of water that was open before the war. I mean, and so the fact that Trump doesn't even really know why he's doing what he's doing, I think is a reason why these allies just don't trust him, because they're not consulted. They've not been brought in at any juncture of this war. and then to focus specifically on the Saudis, the cost to these countries is much, much higher than the cost to the United States. And so already, Qatar has had the largest liquefied natural gas field in the world taken offline, huge hit to their revenue. Kuwait, all these Gulf states have suffered dramatic economic consequences that are going to be lasting for years. Never mind the fact that our European and Asian allies are suffering far more shortages than just high gas prices that Americans are suffering. And look, if he did this Project Freedom, what the Saudis knew is that the Iranians would start attacking again, and they'd start attacking Saudi oil facilities and Saudi energy infrastructure. And so if you're Saudi Arabia, if you're MBS, and you're sitting there and thinking, this guy has not made me a partner from day one, he's bungled this whole war. I don't even frankly know why he's doing it, even if the Saudis don't like the Iranians. Now, why should I allow my airspace used and recognize that I'm going to be attacked by Iranian drones and missiles and potentially suffer huge economic consequences for a war that I don't even understand at this point? That's where we are. And it is a huge geopolitical shift because, as David points out, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis, people with enormous resources have options. And those options include Beijing. They can start to realign themselves geopolitically, and I think that's going to happen, frankly. I mean, not totally, but they're certainly going to hedge. And what we're going to see is the consequences of this war are going to be felt for many years, because if you have Gulf states and Europeans and others moving away from the United States, making their own arrangements with the Chinese and others, that's a totally new world that we're going to be in because of this war.
And let me just press you, not just a new world, but a more dangerous world. I mean, Ben, the only country you haven't mentioned is Russia. But Russia's alliance with Iran in an operational manner seems to be strengthened as well.
Not just that. I mean, there are a couple of things to that. First of all, the Pentagon has not been transparent at all about the damage that's been done to U.S. facilities across the region. And the reporting, which is not surprising to me, is that damage is far more extensive than we knew. Very pinpoint strikes have been launched by the Iranians against U.S. facilities. That's probably, and again, I don't have intelligence, I would assume because the Russians are providing intelligence and information to the Iranians to help them do literal damage to the United States military presence in the Middle East. Never mind the fact that driving up the price of oil, as this war is done, that pads Putin's war machine, because that's how Putin gets revenue, from selling oil. And never mind the fact that the United States has literally had waivers on sanctions that prevented the sale of Russian oil to countries like India because we're so worried about the price of gas. So this is just a geopolitical gift from the heavens to Russia and China, and it's just been devastating to U.S. allies in Europe, in Asia, and in the Middle East. And it just means that the United States can't be trusted. These countries, I think, are exasperated. The Gulf countries tried to flatter Trump. In many cases, they contributed to enriching Trump's family. And now they see that at the end of the day, I mean, one more thing that I hear from people in the Gulf, too, is that we provided a lot of missile defense support to Israel that we did not provide to the Gulf. So they felt a bit like left out in the cold after this war began, that many of them opposed and didn't support because they knew what the Iranian response would be. So I think it's hard for people to understand just how much this has shaken the Gulf Arabs, who literally have an entire security paradigm that is based on stability, predictability, and reliance on the United States.
By now, you've probably seen the news that Virginia's Supreme Court struck down that state's voter-approved congressional maps. Maps that were meant to counter Republican redistricting elsewhere. Maps that voters voted on themselves recently. If you saw that news and screamed into your pillow, or maybe screamed into this street this morning, or your neighbor, your office mate, you are not alone. It is absolutely infuriating that Republicans have engineered this election for their own advantage, that they are eliminating congressional seats that have long represented majority black communities, that they are erasing representation for majority black communities. It is maddening that Democrats' attempts to counter that scheme have faced such challenges, while the Supreme Court has paved the way for Republicans to go further. But it's also important to remember that none of this means Republicans will hold on to power this November. The Republican Party still has to run on their disastrous record. Everything I just mentioned and so much more. Remember the big ugly bill? And voter enthusiasm is still on the side of Democrats, who have won a slew of off-year and special elections since Trump took office. If all of their efforts are successful, Republicans could pick up as many as 19 House seats from redistricting, while Democrats are still expected to pick up as many as 6. That means if everything goes their way, Republicans could give themselves a 13-seat advantage heading into this November. In 2018, the last time there was a midterm referendum on Donald Trump, Democrats picked up 41 seats. And Donald Trump is more unpopular now than he was then. Democrats can still win back the House this November. That is clear. What's also clear is that Democrats cannot just focus on winning back the House. Because in order to counter Republican redistricting, Democrats are going to have to keep fighting to redraw congressional maps after this November. And in order to do that, they're going to need to win control of state legislatures this November and protect the ones they have. The fight for a fair democracy is just the beginning. And it's going to run through state governments across the country. And it's going to take a lot of energy and organizing in this election and beyond. So where does it start? And what happens next? Joining me now are two of the smartest political minds I know. They have won elections. They have been in every room there is about strategy and communications and ads and all of it. Dan Pfeiffer was a senior advisor to President Barack Obama. He's now, of course, a co-host of Pod Save America. And Quentin Fowlkes was the deputy campaign manager for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, former campaign manager for Raphael Warnock's successful Senate campaign in Georgia. And Politico recently described him as the strategist who beat the money machine after his work on Juliana Stratton's Senate campaign in Illinois. So that's a lot of campaigns between the two of you. I think, I just said this, and I know you wrote something this morning too, Dan. When I saw the news this morning, I did want to punch the wall. And I think that probably is how a lot of people out there felt, or worse, or scream, or all those things. And there's clearly a lot that has happened over the last 8 days that is maddening, infuriating, and it's reshaping, of course, the political dynamics. And there are a lot of questions about the longer-term impact. We'll talk about that. But let me just start with the more immediate one, which is where do you stand on Democrats' chances of retaking the House this November, the challenges, and what the path looks like?
Yeah, I think Democrats were, prior to today, and certainly prior to the Supreme Court decision last week, overwhelming favorites to take the House. Right now, I think they are still favorites to take the House. We have a larger hurdle to overcome. But we still are well positioned. Donald Trump's still incredibly unpopular. The political environment cannot be better for Democrats. As you mentioned, there's a massive enthusiasm advantage for Democrats. And the Republicans, their best case scenario is unlikely to happen, right? Even if with the old maps in Virginia, Democrats will almost certainly pick up one seat in the 2nd district and have a very good shot at picking up another seat in the 1st district. In Florida, where they try to add these 4 seats, it's not a guarantee Republicans win all 4 of those seats. Alabama wants to change their map, but they are under a court order preventing them from doing so they have to go to court. Mississippi wants to. They already had their primaries. That's going to cause legal challenges. South Carolina has it. So I think it's going to end up somewhere, not the worst case scenario, but Democrats are still well positioned, and we certainly should double down and keep fighting because we can do this.
What do you think, Quentin? What does this change? How does this change the forecast much? And where do you think is the best opportunity here as we look ahead?
Look, I echo everything that Dan said. I also believe that, we should look at this as an opportunity. Inherently, when you break up these Democratic districts that Republicans are trying to do, clearly we would love to have our districts and not have Republicans try to change the rules. But we also have to look at the momentum that Democrats had before all this started because of the unpopularity of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And we should invest in those districts. Inherently, when you break up these districts, you make the surrounding districts that are Republican held now a little bit more Democratic. And we should look at those areas to invest. I think that we shouldn't sort of take our eye off the ball in regards to, the gerrymandering efforts. And I really think that there's probably only one place left in the country that could really do something in regards to the map, and that's Maryland. I think the Democratic Party should really look deep inwards and make sure that we all recognize that this is much bigger than one state and do everything we can. And so if there is a shot in Maryland, we should take it. I'm not into name-checking people, but there is a pathway to maybe do something there. But we have to continue to invest. Right now, Americans are seeing a president that's more interested in being a geologist than being the president of the United States. And I think that's an advantage for us. And so I think our path, as Dan said, remains clear as it is. Even with the original maps in Virginia, we have seats 1, 2, and 5 that are still in play for us. And then around the country by taking advantage of the gains that Democrats have made. And so we have to continue that work and make sure we're on track come this November.
Let me ask you, Quentin. I mean, one of the things about, say, Senator Warnock's campaign, which you ran, so you know this better than I do, is he showed up in places that surprised people. And he turned out voters in places that I think surprised strategists, right? I'm curious about what you think. I mean, people see this, it feels demoralizing, but there is also anger, I think, that is going on in voters' souls right now. As you think about voter turnout and getting people inspired and engaged, what is the right strategy and the best strategy if you're running a campaign that's impacted by what we're seeing happen in states that are being gerrymandered right now?
Yeah, look, I think that I've always been a believer that you have to go places where people don't think that you can win, and especially in certain races, particularly statewide races, it's easier to do that because even if you lose an area, 80-20 instead of 90-10, just because you go there, it actually plays into the overall scheme. But right now, I don't believe that there's a place that Democrats can't go in the country and talk to voters, because no matter how they draw these maps in any state, the underlying fact remains clear, which is that Americans are dissatisfied with Donald Trump and the Republican Party because of the lack of doing anything that they promised that they were going to do when they sent them there. And I also think that, we have to make sure that we're continuing to speak about the things that actually matter and understand that we're moving from special elections and primary elections that are upcoming this summer to a more general election electorate. And that is going to change the calculus of people. It would be a disservice for the Democratic Party to go out and just think that gerrymandering and this conversation around democracy is going to be the argument that wins. If you knock on 100 doors in this country, maybe 5 or 6 people might say democracy or gerrymandering. The majority of them are going to say, I'm worried about paying my light bill. I'm worried about how much money I'm making at my job. I'm worried about child care, health care. And so as long as we stay focused on the message at hand and the advantage that the Republicans and Donald Trump are giving us for their lack of accomplishments under his leadership, I think the Democrats are going to be just fine. And we should be saying that in districts that are R+5, R+7, all the way up to the districts that we feel safe in, because that is the underlying issue at hand. And that is why Democrats have these advantages going into the midterm elections.
Dan, one of the things this shines a light on for me is just the importance of state legislatures. I think we know that, we've learned that. That's something you've talked about. You all inform people out on Pod Save America about that all the time. Talk a little bit about the importance of those races for people out there who want to tune in. They're trying to inform themselves. Where should they be focused? What should they be paying attention to? And why does that matter so much moving forward?
Sure. Because of the Supreme Court decision, we are now in a world of perpetual redistricting. This is not something we do once every 10 years. Every single cycle, there is the opportunity to redraw the maps in a way that is more favorable, and the risk that the other side will take power and do the same. And the people who draw the maps are state legislatures and governors. And we must elect them. We must give Democratic governors majorities to draw that. We must put pressure on Democratic governors and Democratic legislators to fight fire with fire. There is a bunch of states, New York, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Oregon, Colorado, and others, that in 2028 we can redraw the maps and net as many seats as we could potentially lose from the Supreme Court decision last week. But what's only going to happen is if people elect Democrats who commit to doing that, and then once those Democrats are in office, we put real grassroots pressure on them that anything short of fighting fire with fire is unacceptable.
Turning to the censorship and free speech wars under Trump, ABC, which under Disney had initially wavered but then stood by Jimmy Kimmel, is now going farther. Perhaps buoyed by public support, they're fighting back against the Trump FCC and saying they're violating First Amendment rights and abusing their position as regulators to punish political content they disagree with. This is from a brand new filing. This builds on, of course, what was the past Kimmel skirmish, where the FCC, they say, has created this harmful ambiguity in an area where none previously existed, that there's a chilling effect on First Amendment protected speech. That's because the FCC is trying to go after The View for its anti-Trump criticism and pushing some sort of theory that there are old rules where they have to grant equal time. Now, talk shows have long been exempt from that, and very few people think this is on the level, like that it's about equal time. Most think that it's another way that, while they've often failed, the Trump FCC folks have tried to dial up pressure on Kimmel, on comics, now on talk shows, for using their First Amendment rights to criticize Trump. And we know that does happen on The View.
When you look at the lineup of guests that have typically been on The View, I think it's an uphill climb for Disney to make the case that they're just a straight news program. If you're fake news, you're not going to qualify for the bona fide news exception. And again, the FCC walked away from this for years.
That's just the View piece. There's also Trump's attacks on comedians. He's revived that online. He wants to sort of decide who's on TV, which has proven unpopular. There was that huge backlash when he tried and failed to get Jimmy Kimmel canceled. He's also, of course, celebrated that the Stephen Colbert Show, once it came under the ownership of a company much friendlier to Trump's politics, canceled the show. As we've noted, they've said publicly that it was a financial decision, not bowing to government pressure. But this is the environment we're in. I want to bring in former federal prosecutor Joyce Vance. Good to have you. I noticed the contrast when Disney and ABC initially faced the Trump attack on Kimmel. There were days where they had suspended him and people thought they might fold completely. Now, having won that fight over time, do you see a bit of a different legal strategy in how they're defending The View?
Yeah, absolutely here, because one of the lessons of Trump's second term in office has been that it does no good to prematurely bend the knee when your First Amendment rights are on the line. And that doesn't matter if it's a university, if it's a law firm, or even more recently, this criminal prosecution against the Southern Poverty Law Center. You know, the through line in all of those events, Ari, is this effort to suppress any sort of criticism of this administration. So I think it's interesting to see ABC pushing back here. You know, this issue just involves one station in Houston that was sort of being challenged for the View, which has had this long-term exemption, I think, since the early 2000s, which recognizes that the equal time doctrine doesn't cover straight-up news, but it also doesn't cover news interview shows. And so they have brought in Paul Clement, a former Solicitor General during the Bush administration, which signifies how serious they are about joining those that have stood up, pushed back in court. This is a petition in front of the FCC for now, but they are, I think, trying to demand that their First Amendment rights be honored.
Yeah, and the Kimmel standoff was so fascinating because unlike Colbert, where there was some contested reality, and he did stay on air for many months to fill out the contract, so it just didn't feel quite as a core live event. With Kimmel, you had the country weighing in, and you had Disney going, well, people are really mad if we just turn and cave, like you said. And although for a few days, I remind everyone he was off the air, you know, this is a guy who's hosted the Oscars, and everybody pretty much knows him if you follow media at all. So he had that real voice. I want to play some of what we heard from him. This was April 27th here after the recent firing call.
It was a pretend roast. I said, our First Lady Melania is here. Look at her, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow. He's almost 80 and she's younger than I am. It was not, by any stretch of the definition, a call to assassination, and they know that. Donald Trump is allowed to say whatever he wants to say, as are you, and as am I, as are all of us, because under the First Amendment, we have, as Americans, a right to free speech. But with that said...
Do you think if this does wind its way through the courts, that it helps when you have someone who's actually known? In theory, we all, as he said, have our First Amendment rights. But does it help that Jimmy Kimmel is obviously an American who tells jokes? So it's very hard to make him out to be something else in court.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important point, Ari, because when you're talking about the First Amendment and you're talking about these sorts of issues, there are fine line distinctions that are drawn between different kinds of speech. And of course, joking, making fun of our politicians, even in a very abrasive fashion, that's a hardcore part of the American consensus about speech that the First Amendment protects. And so Kimmel's stature, the fact that people understand what his shtick is, the fact that he himself came out and explained what he was doing and postured it precisely as he did, will make this a much more attractive case as it goes through the courts.
And with Paul Clement, they're saying what? They have a heavy hitter who also has some conservative cred?
I think that that's right. And, you know, the reality here, and of course, in Kimmel, he is still on the air. He has not been fired. If he is fired, I would expect he would have a similar sort of a heavy hitter sort of a situation. You know, this is a situation that's very serious, where the View is not only under investigation by the FCC, but there have been calls for early renewal of licenses as well, which is a relatively serious step and a challenge to whether or not the View is entitled to maintain its exemption. And so bringing in a former Solicitor General always signifies to the courts and to the government that you're very serious about a case. I think it's a way of saying to the FCC, we all know that what you're doing here is wrong. Don't mess with us. We intend to come out with guns blazing.
Yeah. Joyce Vance, thank you.
MS Now's Ken Dilanian helped break this story. He joins me now. Also with us, Rob D'Amico, a former FBI supervisor and MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. And Eddie Glaude is a Princeton University professor and MS Now political analyst. Ken, starting with you, your latest reporting sort of fits into this larger picture of Patel's time as FBI director. Let's put it into context here.
Well, Ariel, Kash Patel came in as a disruptor, right? Saying that the FBI was a corrupt institution. And almost immediately he began firing civil servants in what the FBI Agents Association views as illegal firings. And he's been doing things that have angered and disquieted the large portions of the workforce almost since the moment he took office. And all during that time, people inside the FBI have been leaking embarrassing stories about him, whether it's his conduct in meetings or his his habits of giving away challenge coins with the Punisher cartoon character on them, all kinds of stories. And just as long as that's been happening, Kash Patel has been trying to ferret out who these leakers are. And then our latest reporting is that he's subjecting members of his security detail and others to polygraphs. And that's important because, you know, this Atlantic magazine story that he's suing over, one of the most explosive allegations in that was that there have been times when Kash Patel was drinking so heavily the night before that his security detail had to wake him up or had trouble waking him up in the morning. That only could have come from them, and so now he's trying to put them under the microscope here. And then we're also reporting that he's really in panic mode, that he's afraid for his job. It's no secret that Donald Trump has contemplated firing him, and then he's walled himself off from his senior leadership. Now, his spokesman, Ben Williamson, had a colorful quote. He said the only people panicking are the panicons, that's a word that Donald Trump coined, in the news media and among Democratic politicians who are neglecting to cover the great work that the FBI is doing. Kash Patel believes he's doing great work. A lot of people in the workforce believe that he's essentially disrupted, if not ruined, the nation's foremost law enforcement agency, that it's going to take years to recover from what Kash Patel has done. And now we wait and see whether Kash Patel can keep his job, Ariel.
All right. So, Rob, we're living in some abnormal times, it seems. Is it common practice for an FBI director to polygraph his own staff and security detail over possible leaks?
Absolutely not. If the case was a criminal leak investigation of classified material, then you can see something like that. But, you know, they put this policy in that you can't reveal information that's counter to the administration's viewpoints or, you know, on Patel himself, because it's not a crime to do this. It's a policy the Bureau put in place. So the fact that he's wasting these resources, and that's what he's done from the beginning, you know, new jets and all these other things and BMWs for, you know, his travel and such. He is like a kid. And you see that in his behavior, walling himself off and not doing this and pouting. I think the only reason he's still there is I think the administration doesn't want to fire him because so many people are objecting to it. I think that no firing policy is still holding him in place. But like the names going around the Bureau for him, you know, Make-A-Wish director, because every time he sees something cool, he uses his position as a director of the FBI to do that, to sit in jets in Miramar, to go to hockey games, you know, Olympic hockey games, and then have an excuse for it on business-wise. So it's really starting to getting out. And he's not a part of the FBI culture. He doesn't know agents. Even though tons of agents wanted change with this administration, they did want to see change in the FBI. They gave him a chance, and he's proving them wrong in that he's not serious. He doesn't know what he's doing. It's all selfish. So he's now hibernating and paranoid. And the problem is it's affecting national security. If the FBI wasn't such a strong organization run by serious people, we'd be in problems. They're still doing their job, but he's taking resources away to do that.
And there you saw the split screen of him with the USA hockey team chugging beers. Eddie, so I do want to circle back to this question that many people have been asking. Should the American people be concerned that this is all a distraction from the real job that Kash Patel has, which is keeping Americans safe?
Of course. It's great to see you, Ariel. Of course they should be concerned. What we see here is the effect, the consequence of, in some ways, the death of expertise and competence. Kash Patel is only in this position because he demonstrated fealty, I suppose, to Donald Trump. He did not bring any serious assets or skill sets. He wasn't a part of the culture, as was just said. And I think in this moment, the country's at war. It's at war with not with just another place. It's with Iran, who has an extensive reach that could impact our domestic situation here. So I think the American people should be not only concerned about terroristic threats, but we should be concerned about the deconstruction of the DOJ and the FBI.
Yeah, Eddie mentions fealty to President Trump. Rob, even with all that's going on here, Patel appears to be trying to give the president what he's been asking for, which is to punish someone for his 2020 election loss. In recent days, the FBI has sent an agent to talk to the top election official in Wisconsin about the 2020 election. And just this week, Patel made the case that he's laser focused still on the so-called grand conspiracy against Trump that he says is still going on. Let's listen.
They ran it back just now.
Explain.
In the last election. In the one that just put Trump back in office. They ran the same playbook of getting regurgitated, bogus information, funded by political operatives, seeded into the intelligence community, and that's what we figured out and unlocked. And that is what I spend most of my time when it comes to the de-weaponization of government, focused on collecting those bad actors, getting grand juries, getting prosecutors, and building teams around the country, not just in one location, to look at that, because these people haven't stopped.
You heard in his own words there, Rob, that he's spending a lot of his time on this. What's your reading on that?
He's gaslighting the entire country. He knows what will keep him in the job. And everyone understands, like, if you can give the administration and President Trump what he wants, especially the election. So he comes out with a piece. Every time he gets in trouble, he fires somebody, or he gets on a podcast like he just did with Sean Hannity, to preach what he's doing to support, Mr. Trump's initiatives. And he knows that that's favored. And unfortunately, everyone can read into it. He's gaslighting the entire country, though. He has taken what he said the Bureau was, and he's turned it into that exact same thing, because they never did this before. They didn't investigate journalists for non-criminal leaks. They didn't investigate politicians for things that they're not going to be able to prove. But if he can start it, and then, if the court's getting away or whatever, he can just blame it on, liberal judges, or, whatever term they're using for him now. He just is trying to hang on to his job. And unfortunately, him hanging on to his job, like he said, he's spending all his time on that. And we are at war with Iran, which has very, very much the ability to come back into this country. And then other things, all the espionage things. He fired a bunch of CIA agents who work on counterintelligence for Iran. He fired them because he was upset with what they were doing. So again, he's making the country more unsafe. The Bureau is trying as hard as they can to keep this country safe, but it's tough when you have a director like that.
Eddie, Lawfare published Fulton County grand jury transcripts that showed people like Senator Lindsey Graham, clearly an ally of Trump, repeatedly mentioning to him that he lost the 2020 election, that it was not stolen. But apparently Trump just won't listen to this. At one point, Graham said, quote, "If you told the president Martians came and stole the votes, he'd be inclined to believe it." And yet here we are, years later, the FBI is still investigating 2020. Is this just a situation where, as long as Patel, kind of as Rob was alluding to, as long as he drags this out, as long as he keeps telling Trump what he wants to hear, as long as he gets this to be fired up in courts, even if nothing comes of it, he's got a shot at keeping his job?
Well, on a certain level, Ariel, yes. I mean, if we want to pay attention to the useful idiot here, that's true, that Patel is trying to keep his job. But I think what we need to be paying attention to is that he's also, because he's trying to keep his job, participating in jeopardizing, undermining our democratic process. So we could focus on Patel. We could. But we need to focus on these folks, what they're doing in Fulton County, what they did in Arizona, what they're trying to do in Wisconsin, what we just saw in Virginia, how we're seeing the redistricting going on in the South right now. We're seeing an all-out assault on our democratic process. And we can focus on Kash Patel trying to keep his damn job. But I think we need to be focused on these folks trying to steal our democracy. And I think he's just one of the pawns in that effort to do just that.
And we are about to discuss redistricting in just a moment. Prescient of you. Rob D'Amico, Eddie Glaude, thank you both so much. Appreciate it.
Let's bring in MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, Rick Stengel, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs and an MS Now political analyst, and founder of and president of the Marks Collaborative, retired Major General James Spider Marks. David, the president had described some of the attacks the U.S. launched on Iran last night as love taps. What is CENTCOM describing them as?
They're describing them as sort of deadly fire that was in response to a deadly attack on American ships. It was 3 American destroyers. They were making their way through the Strait of Hormuz. It was an American show of force. Iranian forces attacked them. Either the missiles from Iranian forces missed or drones missed, or the U.S. was able to shoot them down. These destroyers are amazing. They have incredible radar systems that can literally see a bird flying in the distance. So that's a successful military operation, and then the U.S. retaliated and hit some bases on land and other locations where the Iranians were firing at the Americans from. That's a significant exchange of fire. To me, that is a violation of the ceasefire, but I think the president is so eager, critics say desperate, for a deal here that he keeps playing down these potentially deadly clashes between U.S. and Iranian forces.
David Rohde, thank you so much for laying out the very latest for us. Rick, the president did acknowledge that Iran fired on 3 U.S. warships transiting through the strait, and he wrote on social media right after, "We'll knock them out a lot harder and a lot more violently in the future if they don't get their deal signed fast." What does fast even mean? How long is the U.S. willing to wait?
Well, Anna, it's just another example of Trump's usual bluster and rhetoric, thinking that he's going to get a deal because he's using such exaggerated talk. David's point that our retaliation, there's kind of been an understanding, I hope, between the two sides that, you know what, we're going to retaliate, but not to such an extent that it will blow up the talks. We've seen that with Iran before. But, both sides are kind of desperate for a deal. And I do think the negotiations, in a way, what we have seen is when you're negotiating, you can't come to an agreement. You either make it bigger, you either make it smaller, or you kick the can down the road. And basically, that's the third option is what they're doing. They're kicking the can down the road. They're going to say, look, we haven't come to an agreement yet about Iran's nuclear capacity. We're going to negotiate on that for the next few months. Both sides, it's in the interest of both sides to make a deal, and that's why they're going to postpone deciding on some aspects of it.
General, according to the Washington Post, a confidential CIA analysis finds Iran can survive the U.S. naval blockade for at least 3 to 4 months before facing more economic hardship, citing 4 people familiar with the document. And this assessment also finds Iran retains a substantial missile and drone arsenal. Does that surprise you?
Well, it doesn't at all. The fact that Iran has continued to be incredibly resilient, demonstrated this level of resilience over the course of the last 2 months, should not be surprising. Again, I think the United States established an expectation of what would occur as a result of Epic Fury that really extended our abilities to achieve that objective. On the military side, we've achieved some significant objectives. But I think we've learned a lesson at this point that additional firepower against Iran, in other words, a resumption of Epic Fury phase 2 now, is not going to move the negotiations any place closer or get us together to some type of an off-ramp. Clearly, I think, to answer your previous question, I think what Trump would love to do is walk into the room and see Xi next week, shake his hand and say, oh, just FYI, I've got a deal with Iran. Whether that deal is enforceable, almost irrespective of what it looks like. But if Iran and the United States have a deal, then we can walk down the path and start to address the significant issue, which is highly enriched uranium. That has to take place. And then the reopening, and again, let's be frank, the straits are open for vessels that have insurance and they have a captain and an owner who's prepared to take that risk. it will happen. But it needs to get back opened again. So it doesn't surprise me that this analysis from the CIA is saying, look, we in the CIA who have looked at this thing for decades, the regime in Tehran, these guys are going to shoot us the bird as long as they can. They are going to remain in power until the last man standing. The United States cannot do that. If we're where we are today in a number of months, let's say into August or September, and we're on the brink of a global recession, we have to be, and I think we're very mindful of that.
So, Rick, given this CIA assessment suggesting Iran can withstand a lot more pain and they can hold off if the U.S. has a blockade for more months, in fact, and given other reporting that U.S. military assets were more severely damaged by Iran than the administration has let on, what does that mean for the kind of leverage Iran might have in any negotiation?
Well, they do have leverage, Anna. I mean, Iran's calculation from the start was we can withstand more military pain and more economic pain than the U.S. can withstand economic pain. That they're witnessing that all the time. They've had sanctions against them for 20 years and have suffered. I would always count on a people who have an existential threat against them, who have had to live, with very little to outlast it. Plus, it's an authoritarian regime. They're willing to sacrifice the livelihoods and the well-being of their people in order to get what they want. So, and again, I just also want to bring in, to your last question. I mean, the intelligence community basically has been pretty accurate about Iran's capabilities. And it doesn't surprise people like the general. It doesn't surprise, people in international policy. You know who it did surprise? It surprised the White House. The White House didn't think that Iran was that resilient. They didn't understand why Iran attacked the other Gulf countries to kind of try to separate them. So it's coming as a surprise to President Trump and his close advisors, and that's not a good sign.
And General, the UAE says it intercepted more missiles and more drone attacks today, and it comes after Iranian officials blamed the UAE for reported strikes in southern Iran. What could strained relations between these neighboring countries mean for the war going forward?
Well, the GCC nations really have realized at this point that their security is based on what the GCC sees as existential. Clearly, the United States will remain a part of the Gulf Cooperation Council and those relationships. But I think what we might be seeing is a bifurcation within the GCC. Maybe the UAE and Israel might create one bloc, and they've got a pretty tough view toward their relationship with Iran. And again, let's be frank, all of those GCC nations, irrespective of some of their now additional motives, have always been isolating Tehran for the longest time. But with the UAE and Israel, then you have another bloc, which really includes Qatar and Saudi and maybe Pakistan outside of the GCC and Turkey, NATO partner. And that alliance and they have a good relationship with Tehran historically. So that alliance of nations within the GCC might be a moderating influence to Iran. And I think Iran would really like to be a part of the region and not be viewed exclusively antagonistically. But that's going to require a heck of a lot of behavioral changes on their part, because that's been their bulletin board from day one is we want to eliminate Israel and we want to eliminate the great Satan. And guess what? We're the Shia state, and we're probably not going to be very good friends with everybody else. I think moving forward with that potential moderating bloc, we could see some changes. Again, it's going to take some time, and they've got time, and we simply don't.
General Spider Marks, Rick Stengel, thank you both, and happy Friday.